oh, what men want is like a meek little sweet baby girl.
Skinny girl, just cutie girl who likes children's books and also acts like a child a little bit.
Hey everybody, welcome to Rom Com Vom, a Sex Ed with DB podcast miniseries exploring popular rom-coms from the 90s and early aughts that gave us toxic messages about love and sex. Hello, Sex Ed with DB listeners. Welcome back to Rom Com Vom. I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by my friend, Logan Ury, behavioral scientist turned dating coach, director of relationship science at Hinge, and talented author of How to Not Die Alone, the surprising science that will help you find love. Logan, welcome to Rom Com Vom.
Yay, Danielle. So happy to be here.
Yes. And last week's teaser was this. And I'm wondering if folks who are listening have already guessed this or have DM'd us on Instagram to tell us what they think we're talking about today. But this 90s NYC rom-com features two bookstore business rivals who unknowingly fall for each other via anonymous email exchanges. Very interesting. Today, drumroll, we're talking about You've Got Mail, an epic 90s NYC rom-com starring the amazing Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. And we're just going to dive right in, Logan. We're going to do our segment as a kid. And so I want to know your personal history with You've Got Mail. Like, when did you first see this movie? What did you think about it as a kid? Did you feel like it kind of impacted the way that you saw any sort of communication and relationships?
Yeah. So this movie came out the year after I got the internet. I remember I got the internet on Christmas Eve of 1997.
What a gift to the world.
And so I definitely was on AOL, all of the sounds of the movie in terms of, connecting to the internet. Those are all familiar sounds of my childhood. Also, the You've Got Mail was so iconic. I remember when Austin Powers came out, they recorded like an Austin Powers You've Got Mail. Do you want to do it? Do you want to do an impression of that for us?
It's like, yeah, baby, you've got mail.
I think that was exactly what it was. And so anyway, lots of memories of that. I remember seeing the trailer for the movie, and then I remember going to see it with my neighborhood friend, Chelsea Schulman, and her babysitter. So I did see the movie in theaters, and I really liked it and thought it was cute. And of course, I had a different reaction watching it years later.
Yes, of course. It's so funny because I feel like this is a very classic New York City movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like we kind of talked about this during our rewatch, but it's somehow they end up on the same block all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very much
always
like
in Zabar's.
They're always in Zabar's. They're always kind of doing Jewish things, even though neither of them are Jewish, I believe. No, they're just kind of at the street fair and they're, on the dock and they're in these like Upper West Side blocks and it's beautiful fall. And it's just very like enchanting, this whole movie. So I feel like it adds to the aesthetic. But I don't know actually if I saw this one as a kid. I maybe saw it with my mom. I feel like it was a very my mom probably loved this movie a lot. I feel like moms love Meg Ryan in general. But I don't remember ever feeling like I understood what happens at the end of this movie until I was an adult watching the rewatch. And so I don't know if this one had a particular impact on the way I viewed relationships, but I did feel this that Meg Ryan was very wantable. Like she was very cutesy. She was very feminine. Like she just very much was this and at the same time, she kind of dresses like a butch lesbian, which is very, very interesting. But I think that's just 90s femme. But in case it's been a while since you've seen it, listener, here's a quick recap of the movie. So You've Got Mail stars Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan as Joe Fox and Kathleen Kelly, two business rivals who unknowingly fall for each other via anonymous email exchanges, and their digital romance blossoms while in real life, their business feud escalates. So this culminates in Joe Fox's bookstore, Fox Books, driving Kathleen's beloved indie cutesy shop that her mom, I keep thinking that she died in this shop just to think that it's so much more intense than it is. She probably did not, but it kicks her out of business. And so I think why we're talking about this today, as much as we love this cutie, and the email nostalgia of the 90s and the Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan chemistry, which is cute, I suppose. You've Got Mail really sends us some seriously mixed messages about love, power dynamics, and honesty in relationships. And so I want to break down the good, the bad, and the very questionable with you. So there are three kind of most problematic elements that I want to talk about here. The first one is like the deception in the digital relationship. So we find out that Joe knows who Kathleen is long before she knows who he is. How do you think that this affects like consent and trust in this relationship?
Yeah, I mean, just responding to a few things you said, I don't think it had a long-term impact on the way that I view relationships, but I think it did make me want to go to New York.
Yes.
Like at that stage, I'd never been to New York. And it is like, it's such a cliche, but it's like New York is the main character. New York is the love affair. So it definitely romanticizes New York. And then in terms of what I remembered, like I remembered parts of their chemistry. Like I did kind of quote to you before I rewatched it, like go to the mattresses, like leave the guns, pack the cannolis. Like I had never seen The Godfather, but I'd seen You've Got Mail quoting The Godfather. So then I had those quotes. So it's like, I remembered the chemistry, but I didn't really remember the dynamic. Like if you'd asked me if her shop closes at the end, I would have been like, no, of course it gets saved by the neighborhood. Like it is pretty surprising. So anyway, I don't think it had impacts on that, but I do think it had an impact on me, probably just like the Meg Ryan version of femininity, like as you said, like super girly, super childlike, like sort of meek but sweet. And I think that is interesting, like the characters you see in rom-com, the women that you see in rom-coms, and then you think like, oh, that's who I should be. And like she almost reminded me of Carrie Bradshaw a little bit, like oh my goodness, like ooh.
There's so much like like stomping her little feet,
right? Like, which I don't really relate to Carrie. So anyway, I'm kind of taking this in my own direction, but yes, I do think that I bet it did have an impact on me on like terms of like heterosexual dating. Like, oh, what men want is like a meek little sweet baby girl,
skinny girl, just cutie girl who likes children's books and also acts like a child a little bit,
right? And like I probably went out and bought pomade or whatever that stuff's called for your hair,
like she has to make it like slick against the forehead.
She definitely had a look. But yes, in terms of the deception and dishonesty, like I think that their emails back and forth are really sweet, and it's written by Nora Ephron. It obviously has very nice writing in it. Like I think that's like a very strong element of the movie and something that makes it great. But you're right. Like once he figures out who she is and then he keeps going with it, not only is that deceptive, but he also uses it to manipulate her. So he uses this intimate knowledge that he gained from their conversations to then manipulate her emotions both online and in person. So knowing like, oh, she needs business help. Oh, she needs that. Like he definitely kind of took advantage of her in that way.
Totally. Yes. And it's so clear, like they're setting up this guy, Tom Hanks's character, which is kind of funny because typically, he's been in like Sleepless in Seattle, and like my favorite movie of all time is Forrest Gump, and he is the lead of that movie. And so
good.
He is never like the mean guy, right? Maybe he was recently like Elvis's manager as like the asshole, which I didn't see that movie, but I know that that's who he played. And in this movie, he's very much like a shark who like doesn't really give a shit. His dad and his grandpa, we'll get into these dynamics at some point, but his dad and his grandpa are like marrying these younger women and having kids in like their 70s and 80s, which is so insane and questionable and funny. And he just very much is this like asshole. And so I feel like that comes across when he starts to know who she is and she has no clue. So not only is he like deceiving her, but he's like all the while like stealing her business, her small business.
I don't know if I exactly agree that they portray him as the asshole, because like they go out of their way to have that scene where he's at the fair with his, quote unquote brother and aunt, which is like these two little kids. So I feel like they do try to show like he's a nice guy, like he has a golden retriever. He's good with kids. But I think when it comes to work, he does have this like 80s, 90s vibe of like, get the money.
Right.
Show me the money. And so I think that at the time when it wasn't as much of a period where people like question capitalism, I think they were just like, look at this sexy guy who's good with kids and dogs and he's good at making money.
Right. But do you find Tom Hanks sexy? Like, I don't.
I don't think he's sexy, but like clearly he's been cast in a lot of rom-coms. So like other people
There's
do at
there.
The time.
I
think that he has a charm. I think he feels safe. I think he's really funny. I think he has like a masculinity in the movie that people might be attracted to just in terms of his like success and aggression. I think people might be drawn to that. No, I don't ever think of him as a sex symbol or crush, but like definitely the chemistry that they have and the playfulness. And he's also does like really good physical comedy. I think he's very great in the movie.
Totally. Yeah, I think you're right. In the fair, when he's kind of like hanging out with his aunt and his brother and he takes them to the bookshop, and like there is this kind of like fatherly like moment I think that he's having, which is nice.
I think that they're trying to tell you he would be a good dad. He's nice enough for her. Oh no, this insurmountable problem came up. What are we going to do?
Right.
But you're right. He's not above lying. Like he says, I'm Joe, just call me Joe. Like he totally knows that if she knew who he was, she wouldn't like him. So yeah, he does like deceptive behaviors that we're supposed to think are very cute.
Yes. And this kind of goes to the power imbalances here. So like Joe's like corporate power versus Kathleen's small little beautiful business and the struggle, right? And so I'm wondering, as a dating coach in particular, right? Like what does this kind of say about the possible power imbalance in their romance? Like eventually when they, do figure out who each other is, like where do we go from there once we know this power imbalance exists?
Yeah. So let's say that Kathleen were my client. I would say, what's your relationship history? What's your dating history? Does she tend to be drawn to people who dominate her? And maybe that's a dynamic that she likes and it works for her. Or maybe actually she makes herself smaller so they can make themselves bigger. And maybe she needs to be in a more equitable relationship. Maybe she needs to be dating women.
Whoa.
Who knows? And so I think I would really want to start by going deep with her and really understanding like, who are you in your life right now? What are you looking for? She does seem a little lost. Like it's very cute that her mom opened the shop 40 years ago, but she also has like kind of an identity that was inherited. And so maybe she needs to do some exploration. And so I'd really talk to her about that. And then for Joe, I would talk to him about the lessons that he learned from his dad and grandfather. So like, as we've been alluding to, his dad has a 4-year-old son and his grandfather has something like a 7 or 8-year-old daughter. And so like, he has these lessons of like, women are disposable. There's a scene with his dad on the boat where they talk about all the women that his dad has been with, who many of them were his nannies or his teachers. And so he also has inherited a lot of negative scripts around relationships and dating. So I would talk to them about that. And then with her, I might say, what side of you does this bring out? And so in some ways, in terms of the digital communication, he brings out a great side of her. She does write. She's like writing, and she says that the emails helped her write for the first time in a long time, which leads maybe to a children's book. He brings out a side of her where he's really interested in what she has to say versus like her other boyfriend at the time who just kind of like talks over her and is very domineering and kind of a iconoclast, someone like that. And then I'd really help them understand like, okay, you had this like crazy thing that happened. How do you feel about the deception? How do you feel about how he showed up? And what would you need to regain trust in order to feel safe in this relationship?
Calling all couples who are feeling like your relationship, especially the sexual connection, has lost its spark is just so-so, or maybe you're feeling stuck or in a rut. Wah, wah, wah. Well, first off, you are completely normal and not alone. This is super common in long-term relationships. Second, there's hope. Maybe you've thought about seeking out support from a coach or therapist, but for whatever reason, aren't feeling ready to take that leap. Never fear, Shameless Sex is here. The book, I mean. While our latest book, Shameless Sex, Choose Your Own Pleasure Path to Unlock the Sex Life You've Been Waiting For, is for everyone, it's specifically geared towards couples who are looking to go from so-so to great in the bedroom and beyond. Written in a playful and fun choose-your-own-adventure style, we give you a simple framework with customized solutions to give you the right tools for the sex and relationships you desire, meaning you just might find your way to sexy pleasure and connection town without the time and cost of hiring a therapist for under $30. Plus, buying the book supports us and shows us you love us, so that's a bonus too. Testimonials are coming in left and right as to how this book helped people just like you create or recreate the sex life of their dreams. And you can too. Grab your hardcover copy or audio version now at shamelesssex.com.
It is funny how, like, yeah, the idea of like inheriting kind of these scripts from our families and from other relationships that we're seeing. I think like the whole, like the writing in that like Joe's stepmom is like a creep and is like touching his leg during Christmas and is kind of like trying to kiss him on the mouth. I'm just like, what's going on here? Like, what is it? I just feel like the way that Nora Ephron and her writing partner, whoever else wrote this movie,
her sister Delia,
it was a sister writing duo. This is good info. And yeah, I think just like that, the fact that this was written by women and the women are either like Parker Posey, like business bitch.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about her.
Let's do it. Okay, what do you want to say about her?
You know, I'm just even thinking back to your earlier question, like what impression did it give me? But I think it probably was just like, oh, there's two ways to be a woman. Like you can be a cutesy little mouse who men want to take care of, or you could be like a businesswoman who like makes money and has things to say, but like nobody wants to have sex with them. Like just, Parker Posey's like, she's not feminine in it. And you're supposed to be like turned off by her. Like in the beginning, like the first scene, she's like, I need a Java, like give me the coffee. And then later he's like, coffee's afraid of her. Like, she's like over the top, like boss bitch, not relaxed. In some ways I like her because like I like women like that. Like there's a part where she's talking about how after the shop closes, she's going to give her a book deal and all of this stuff. So like I personally like her, but I'm sure like as a young person, I was like, oh, the good thing to be is the feminine one because that's who men want to be with. And like he didn't really take Parker Posey's character seriously. He wasn't ready to propose to her. Like it's just, I think that she does represent this stereotype of a businesswoman who ultimately men don't want to be with.
Right. And the power question here is really interesting because she kind of matches Joe's power dynamic here. They're both like very domineering, very dominant, top of their field. Like I don't know like exactly, but it kind of felt like by the way that she said her name was that she also is this like famous name. Like maybe comes from publishing.
Yeah, you're right.
And so it feels like they're very much like made for each other in that way, but there's like zero chemistry between them. Like we barely even see them kiss. And it's kind of the same thing between Greg Kinnear's character, Frank, and Meg Ryan's character, Kathleen. Like they are kind of dating. And I mean, I think speaking of power, I really want to talk about now the conversation that they have as the breakup, Frank and Kathleen. Like, do you have any immediate, maybe I'll describe it first and then I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So for those of you who haven't seen it, Frank who's played by Greg Kinnear, and Kathleen are in a relationship, and that you could tell that like she's not really that into him. Like obviously at the beginning of the movie, like each of these people, they're waiting for their partners to leave so that they can get back on AOL and send an email to who they really want to send an email to, which is each other. And so there's a scene where Greg Kinnear's character and Meg Ryan's character, they go to the movies, and Kathleen is like, I didn't vote. And so like, I'm going to stick it to you because he's this kind of self-righteous, like political person who's a writer, who's obsessed with his typewriter and all of these things. And they end up getting a glass of wine, and he's kind of in the process of breaking up with her. And she's like, oh, you don't love me? And he's like, no, I don't. And she's like, well, I don't either. And they kind of have this like moment of true honesty together. And I feel like it was very sweet and sincere and authentic, and just a really interesting way to view a breakup scene. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think when we were watching it together, you said it was refreshing, and I think that's the perfect word for it. It's not really the kind of breakup scene that you normally see, because if you're writing a breakup scene for drama, you're going to talk about one person being left behind and one person being disappointed and the heartbreak. But like that wasn't the scenario. It was just like two people who in some ways matched, but in other ways didn't, basically being like, we're both not into this, and having the confidence and even like abundance mindset to say like, okay, we'll be with other people. Like they didn't seem that stressed, and they weren't really, it was just like a pretty low key conversation. It was like, I've fallen out of love with you. I've fallen out of love with you too. You're a wonderful person, wishing you the best. And you don't see that many relationships like that. Honestly, like what I would say is that once people have kids and once people are older, it does get a lot harder, because I think that there is a stereotype that like the woman will have a much harder time finding love again. And the man will have an easier time. And so I think that there's like more of a power imbalance in like heterosexual relationships, 40 plus with kids, but that in this situation, it was really nice to see them just be like, we're on the same page. That's great.
Totally. Yeah. Since there weren't kids in the picture, I don't know, the way they make it seem like, oh, and I just moved out. Like, obviously they're really like making it seem like it's way easier to do some of these things because they're fast forwarding because it's a movie. But yeah, like that scene where Joe is like, Brinkley and I, we just moved out to our boat because we're rich. It's like, oh, okay. And that's why you're able to move out.
I didn't know if you were going to bring this up, but like, think about the timing of the movie. Like the movie came out in 1998, which probably means it was shot in like 96 or 97, right? So people hadn't really had in-depth conversations around like emotional affairs or digital infidelity. I don't think that was at all a conversation for a long time. And so they sort of don't really demonize it. They're just like, they're both in relationships, and then they meet in a chat room for 30 plus, and then they start talking, and they, sneak out of their rooms to go talk on their laptops, but like, it's not seen as cheating.
Right.
And like, even we talked about this in person, but this idea of like, he says to her, I moved out. So it's implying that he was in a relationship and he and his dog moved out, yet he was going to meet up with her. And then when she says to him, are you married? An idea he planted with her in person. He's like, how dare you say that am I married? Like
ultimate
gaslighting. That part, like actually it's ultimate gaslighting, but that part also just doesn't make any sense because it's like, whose house were you moving out of if you weren't in a relationship? And so I think that the movie goes light on the idea of an emotional affair. Whereas if that movie were made now, I think people would see it as like, they were completely out of love with their partners. They were exploring other people. They should have just broken up with their partners as soon as they felt that they weren't ready to be in that relationship, not for the other person, but just because they weren't in it. And so I think that's something that the movie kind of Nora Ephron glosses over.
Yes. I do think it's interesting too, like this idea of like the emotional affair versus the question that Birdie asked, like the older person who works in her little bookshop of like, well, are you having cyber sex? And there's like a little joke of her being like, I tried to have cyber sex once. Like they're making light of this thing. But the reality is that Joe and Kathleen aren't sharing nudies. They're not really talking about sex. But of course, like when they're each asked, like, are you in love? Each of them immediately thinks of this pen pal that they have, not their actual partners. And so clearly there's some emotions going on here.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And then even like of course, the movie has a Pride and Prejudice plot where it's like, that's my favorite book. And like, have you read Pride and Prejudice? Because like what they're doing essentially is they're pen pals. They're writing letters to each other. In some ways it's instant. And at some point they like IM instant message, but it does kind of have like the slow romance vibe of like a Victorian era sending letters back and forth. And I think that is kind of the like written by a woman romantic vibe.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Let's get into this like toxic forgiveness moment here because at the end of the movie, Kathleen ends up forgiving Joe, right? Theoretically, that's what we understand from their epic kiss. Even though he is partly responsible for destroying her livelihood, right? So like, what message do you feel like this sends about relationships and the types of life partners that we are seeking here?
Yeah, I think there was a few things going on. So one is like, it justifies his behavior for love. So it's sort of saying like, even though you were deceitful and you had information that I didn't have and your harmful business practices, it doesn't really matter because like we have great chemistry and good conversation. I think it also undermines her as a businesswoman. Like it seems like his shop opens up in the fall and then like as of Christmas they close down. Yeah. And so it almost seems like there's no way to make up the business. There's nothing that she can do. It just kind of feels like her passion and her 40 years of this business with her mom, like just go away. And so I really do think that it reinforces these gender stereotypes that like, it's okay for him to be the big businesswoman. It's okay for her to be naive and reliant on her. And ultimately it just kind of says like anything is fair in love and war.
Yes, totally. We're going to get to the cringe corner in a second, where we each share our most cringeworthy, outrageous lines, and
Ooh.
we're going to each award one moment with the coveted Golden Facepalm Award. So
Great.
I'll go first. I think the Golden Facepalm Award goes to the line that Joe says when they're kind of chatting before she goes and meets him, and she doesn't know that it's going to be him, but he does know that it's going to be him. And he says, quote, "If only I hadn't put you out of business, could you have forgiven me?" Like,
oh my
I'm sorry.
God, that's so funny.
Like, I just feel like that is absolutely insane for him to say out loud, to say like, listen, I know that I took away your family's business, but like, if I didn't, would you love me? And it's like we know he's rich. It's very easy for him and even Nora Ephron to have written in at the end, like 2 months later, that they they reopened the bookstore or something, but he didn't do that.
Right,
so like,
right.
I think that is my Golden Facepalm Award. I'm curious if there is a line or a moment that you would
Yours
award.
is great. I didn't write down a specific quote, but there was the scene where she's waiting for him at the coffee shop, or she's waiting for her pen pal, and she's feeling very vulnerable. Like she's wearing her little sweater set. She's holding her book, which has a rose on it. Yeah. And he comes over and like, she's already feeling vulnerable. Her date didn't show up. And then he sits down across from her. He's clearly making her uncomfortable. He orders something when she says he's not staying. Then he sits behind her. Like he's basically harassing her.
Right.
And so I think just this moment of like her not really being able to create a boundary with him, and him knowing that the guy's not going to show up because he is the guy, just kind of taking advantage of her in that situation.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And then she's like, please leave. I beg you. And you think that he's actually going to leave. And then he just moves to the other chair. That kind of reminds me, just quickly before we rate the movie and give our final thoughts, that entire scene where she's sick in her apartment, right?
Oh, yeah. Awful.
Like, oh my God. Okay. So she's sick in her apartment and she's like, go away. Basically, I don't want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. Like, you're mean and you're like basically on the way to steal my business. He gets in the door by someone else opening their key to their the apartment. And he goes and knocks on her door, kind of inserts himself open, but he has flowers. So because he has flowers, we're supposed to think like, oh, this is fine. Then he sits on her bed and then like tells her to shush and like puts his hand on her mouth. You're like, sir, please leave. Like, I'm sick. It's this whole trope of men should be chasing you and you should be chased by them. And it's appropriate as long as they're bringing flowers or as long as it's in the name of love, then the way that they treat you is A-okay. And I just think that whole scene was like indicative of that.
I agree with your read on that scene. Like I would say like the first 75% of the movie is really cute. And then the last 25%, you're just like, oh, this is how it ends.
Right.
Like this is what happens. Her shop closes and he like kind of harasses her. And so I think that scene is really problematic. And I'm glad that you're doing this series because it is this thing where it's like, what are the messages that we've perceived? And one of them is toxic behavior that crosses boundaries is okay in the name of love, or toxic behavior that encroaches on your safety is okay, as long as the person is cute and charming and you wind up together.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I agree with you. Like on a general scale, like all of these movies that we're talking about in this series, I like them. Like I enjoy them.
I like the movie too.
Like I think that rom-coms are such a sweet way to laugh and to connect and to dream and to fantasize. But I just think that it's so fascinating how we have to have internalized these messages, right? Like there's no way from a vulnerable age, we're not having a critical eye on these things. And so it really is important for us to go back and do these rewatches as adults and like rewrite these scripts in a way. And so, okay, so I would like for you to rate the movie from 1 to 5 voms. We got 1, it's dated, but mostly harmless. 5, full body cringe, aged like milk. What would you put this in?
I would give it a 2.5.
This is a good rating. I agree, honestly. I think it's good.
Yeah, it's like, I liked the movie. I had fun watching it. I wasn't bored. The scenes are beautiful. Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks have great chemistry. It's well written. It's just like the portrayal of their power imbalance is pretty cringe and his boundary crossing is pretty cringe.
Yeah.
But I don't think, oh my goodness, like when I watched this movie, it like redefined how I thought about myself, which like maybe there are other movies that I did feel that way about. So yeah, I think kind of right in the middle.
I think that's good. Yeah, I'll give it a 3 just because of how it ended. I think like it could have been very easy, like I said, to do something different, and I just wish that the final message wasn't like that. It's okay that he took over her business. But I guess to wrap up, we're gonna do final thoughts and a brief rewrite. So just any final thoughts, and like if there's one thing you could have rewritten for Nora and Delia for this film, what would it be?
Yeah, maybe the end would have her becoming a best-selling children's author. I think it's okay that the store closed because like I think maybe one of the messages they were trying to tell us was this was kind of her inherited identity. She didn't necessarily choose it, although she did seem very, very happy and loving doing her stuff. So maybe like you understand that she goes on to have like a big career as a children's book author. And like, it might have even been cool if she did work with Parker Posey.
Imagine that would be kind of funny, like having Parker Posey be in the last scene. And like, what if like she and Joe didn't end up together, and then it was like Parker Posey's character and Kathleen, like as the duo, like how fun.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe they're dating.
Maybe they're dating. Who's to say? There's always a room for a sequel here. Logan, thank you so much for being on. Before I let you go, I want to share with our listeners the teaser of the rom-com that we're going to be talking about next week. DM us on Instagram at Sex Ed with DB Podcast. Tell us what you think it is. Next week, we're talking about an epic rom-com loved by all. Set in a high school in Seattle, the film follows the story of a rebellious and fiercely independent teenager and her relationship with the charming and witty bad boy of the school. As the movie unfolds, we witness the hilarious and heartwarming journey of the lead's younger sister, who can't date until she does. So, Logan, thank you again for being on. Folks who are listening, definitely check out Logan on Instagram and her book. We'll put all of that in the show notes of this episode. Logan, I really appreciate it. It's so nice to chat.
Yeah, love to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to rewatch You've Got Mail.